Hey everyone, today's video is going to be all about taking off and landing on water with the Icon A5, the only water-worthy plane in the standard version of the game. The Icon A5 is a super fun little plane to fly around in the game, and what's neatest about it is that you can land on water or on ground. You won't travel great distances with the Icon, obviously, with its top cruise speed of 85 knots and its range of 427 nautical miles, but to fly around somewhere that you're not familiar, it can be more than sufficient. The first challenge I had with trying to take off from water in this airplane is that I wasn't actually able to find any waterways in the game yet. For example, I do know there are two waterways at Honolulu International, but when you zoom in, you just can't see them. They should be right around here and here, if I remember correctly, but you can't select them and you can't see them on the map either. In fact, these parkings look like they are in the water, but I can assure you they aren't. I did find one way to take off from the water, but it requires a little bit of flight simulator magic to make it work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a parking spot that I know is near the water. Let's say this one right here, ramp 154. I'll set that as my departure, and I am just going to go straight into the game. Okay, so the game's loaded up, and I am just going to start the plane with the auto start shortcut to get everything going. So from here, the first thing that I actually tried and failed was to just taxi right into the water and take off. Unfortunately, the moment I hit the water, the simulator seems to think that I've crashed and it resets the flight for me. As I mentioned though, I did find a workaround, and that involves using Slew Mode. I've spoken about Slew Mode before in a couple of my videos, and I've used them for a few different things in the game, and it comes in useful for starting from the water as well. Make sure to start the engine before you use Slew Mode if you're going to use this technique. When I've moved myself into position before starting the engine, the game thought my flight was finished because my engine was stopped. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press the Y button to enter Slew Mode. That's going to bring me to the external view, and I'm going to get a little bit of altitude so I can see what I'm doing. So from here I can almost see where the waterway should be. You can see the main runway over there, and the waterway should be running parallel to it here, and another one coming up along here parallel to the other runway behind me. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to move myself forward a little bit, just like that, and I'll turn myself around. Here we go. And then I will drop down to the water level. So you can see that my wheels are up at the moment. Something interesting is going to happen once I exit Slew Mode is it's actually going to retract the gear. So if I just press Y now, the engine's actually going to stop, but I can just restart it. I'm not quite sure why the engine is dying, but you can definitely restart it. And at that point, if you look at your landing gear, you're going to see that the landing gear is up, as it should be for water landing. Now, in theory, there is a water rudder here that you can turn on. I honestly don't notice much of a difference if I have it on or off, so it's up to you to decide if you want to use it. Before takeoff, the other thing you might want to check is that the parking brake is off. It's not going to make a big difference if you're going to be landing in the water, but if you're going to be landing on ground and your parking brake is on, you might get a little bit of a surprise. Also, because we started from the parking position, just make sure to check your trim is set properly for takeoff. In my case, I'm just going to set it into that takeoff zone right there, and I should be good. Another thing that's kind of cool that I didn't realize is that because we're on water, the plane is naturally going to turn into the wind because of the way water works. Unlike when you're on the ground, the wind hitting the rudder, if you're not moving, generally won't move your plane. But because we're on water, which is obviously liquid, the airplane is just going to naturally want to turn into the wind. So if you want to counteract that, obviously you'll have to use your rudder pedals to do that. The other thing of note is that you won't be able to use air traffic control for your takeoff. The ATC doesn't even know that these runways exist, so it'll just get confused if you try to ask for a taxi to a different runway. Takeoff in this plane is pretty easy though. All you've got to do is set your flaps to the first position and apply full power, and you're pretty much set. Because we're taking off from the water, there won't be any landing gear to pull up as we take off either. All we'll have to worry about are the flaps. So what I am going to do is I'm just going to apply a little bit of power to get us moving, and I'm going to align myself with the runway, which is running parallel to that other runway right behind it, which I believe is 422. So I'll just line myself up there, just about like that. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to switch to the 3D vision view so that it's a little bit easier to keep an eye on my altitude. The altimeter is really hard to read because it's a little bit too zoomed out on the actual gauge. So with that done, I'm just gonna apply full power. And the plane's going to get moving pretty quick, and you can see it sort of jumps up a little bit out of the water there. 50 knots is going to come up fast as well, at which point I'm going to rotate until we're airborne right there. And I will pull my flaps back now because I don't need them. And I'll reduce power a little bit as well because this plane really feels overpowered for what it should be. I don't know if the real plane flies like this, but it definitely feels like it's got more horsepower than what I was reading about. Alright, so now that I am airborne, I am just going to do a left-hand traffic pattern here and come back around for landing. I'll spare you the details of the traffic pattern. If you haven't flown traffic patterns before, make sure to check out my previous video on that. And I will see you in a couple seconds as I turn towards base or final. Alright, so I am just getting ready to turn onto base to prepare for my landing. I'm flying at around 75 knots and my altitude is around 600, so I'm going to start a very slow descent as we turn out. You can see where I want to land is right there, which is where we took off a few seconds ago. So I am going to extend my first level of flaps just to slow us down a wee bit more. And I'm going to line myself up for final. So the most important thing when it comes to landing this plane is the AOA gauge that you see in the center of the dash. You can see that the white part is moving. That part represents your wing. What you want to do is you want to try and have your wing on the dashed line in the middle of the dash just as you're about to touch down on the water. If you're landing on a short waterway, if you will, what you would do is you would put your wing on the yellow line instead. You're going to want to avoid a more steeper angle of attack than that because that could put you at risk of damaging the plane on landing. So I am going to extend the last little bit of flaps, and I'm going to make sure my gear is definitely up. And what I'm doing is I am trying to land exactly like I would land at a real runway. Is I am aiming for a spot and trying to keep it at the same spot in my view screen. So in this case, I'm aiming for that little black spot just beyond the pontoons over on the left there. So it's about an inch further. So I'm trying to just keep that in my peripheral view while I come down so that I touch down just around there or so. The final landing speed for this airplane is around 50 knots, so I'm just going to reduce power to around 3,000 RPM, which will give me just about what I want to slow down to 50. So we can see that spot where I was aiming for is coming up now. And what I'm going to do as I get closer to the ground is I'm going to start pulling back on the stick a little bit so that we increase that angle of attack, get our airspeed down to 50, and I'm just going to slowly reduce power. We're at 10 feet now, so I'll pull up a little bit more, and I'll just let the plane settle down on the water nice and smoothly, just like that. So obviously there aren't any brakes when you land on water, so you need to make sure that you've picked a spot where there is either lots of open water or a decent amount of space for you to land and come to at least a somewhat of a stop where you can turn to avoid any obstacles. The other thing is, just as you land, make sure to hold a little bit of back pressure on the stick because the nose could potentially tip forward, which would cause you to crash. So that's all there really is to taking off and landing in the Icon A5. If you have any questions or anything you'd like clarifications on, please make sure to put them in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.